guest, someone that's going to walk us through big stories in the news, also things that have happened in the past. John Kiriakou, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Stephen. It's my pleasure.
So let me give my audience some background. John was a former CIA spy. He was over the operations in Pakistan, other parts of the world. He later became a whistleblower against the United States government. He exposed the American government's torture programs. He ended up being sent to jail. He's also authored several books. You had mentioned on Twitter that the Jeffrey Epstein operation is a classic example of a foreign government-run blackmail scheme, and there's no reason to protect these files anymore. Many in my audience, they want Pam Bondi to move quicker. They want Kash Patel to move quicker. Why did you say that? Help me and my audience understand.
Oh, you bet. You bet. I was on Piers Morgan's show a couple of weeks ago, debating this with the former head of Mossad and Alan Dershowitz. And, on the rare occasions when I could get a word in with Alan screaming above everybody else, I tried to lay this out. And it's actually very, very simple. And I'll actually answer your question with an anecdote. One of my instructors at the farm, the CIA's training facility, told me once that the best recruitment he ever made was a copy machine repairman. And I laughed when he said it. And he said, no, hear me out. He said, all of us want to recruit the prime minister when we go overseas. We're not going to recruit the prime minister. We're probably not going to recruit anybody close to the prime minister. But the prime minister has a copy machine in his office. And that copy machine eventually is going to need servicing. So you recruit the copy machine repairman. And when he goes in there to wipe the drums and make the repairs, he also installs a device so that every time somebody makes a copy, it transmits a copy back to CIA headquarters. He said, I got a medal, I got a promotion, I got a photo op with the director. It was the best recruitment I ever made. Well, with that in mind, wouldn't the Israelis love to recruit a former president, the richest man in the world, the sixth in line for the British throne, Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft? Sure, they'd love to recruit those guys, but they're not going to. And so they do the next best thing. They recruit somebody who can get close to them. It's called an access agent. We don't know the source of Jeffrey Epstein's wealth. We also, and more importantly, don't know the reason why Jeffrey Epstein was able to get away with sex crimes against minors for decades. How he somehow survived those kinds of allegations and continued to thrive, it's a mystery. So where did he get his money? Why did he wire the rooms at his private island mansion for audio and video, and then cultivate relationships with some of the most important and wealthiest people in the world? Why? For whom? I would posit that it was for Israel. Now, we know the Israelis spy on Americans, and this also came up in the Piers Morgan segment. I said that on my very first day at the CIA, on the very first day, you stand in the auditorium, you put your hand in the air, and you swear to uphold and protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And then there's a parade of senior officers coming. The director welcomes you to the CIA. The head of HR comes and talks about the promotion system. The head of security came to talk about counterintelligence. For example, he said, the nearest restaurant to CIA headquarters is a steakhouse right down the street. Don't ever go there, because the Russians think we all go there. And so the place is all KGB all the time, right? Rule number one. Rule number two, he said, don't trust anybody. For example, he said in the Israeli embassy here in Washington, there is a declared Mossad officer and a declared Shin Bet officer. Now, when I say declared, I mean the Israeli government has come to us and has said, this is a Mossad officer, this is a Shin Bet officer, and they're here to work with you, okay? But the FBI has identified 187 undeclared Israeli intelligence officers spread all across America, stealing defense secrets from our defense contractors. In addition to that, the Israeli Mossad recruited Jonathan Pollard in the 1980s. He spied for the Israeli government, sending them top secret documents, U.S. military documents, which the Israelis then traded to the Soviet Union in exchange for Russian Jews. Jonathan Pollard was found guilty of espionage and sentenced to 30 years in prison. He did every day of it. So I said, of course it would stand to reason that Jeffrey Epstein would be an Israeli access agent. No, the head of Mossad says, we don't spy on Americans. I said, clearly you spy on Americans. Not since Pollard. I said, Pollard was caught in 1985. In 1990, the head of CIA security said that there were 187 Israeli spies all around the United States. And he laughed. He just laughed like,
well, them.
Yeah. Oh, them. Yeah, well, I forgot about them. And then Dershowitz said the most absurd thing. He said, I was Jeffrey Epstein's attorney, and he never said to me that he was working for the Israelis. And I said, oh, there's a surprise. An Israeli spy doesn't confess that he's an Israeli spy. And then Dershowitz said, if I had told the government he was an Israeli spy, I could have gotten him a better deal. And I said, how do you figure that? That would have been a confession to espionage. He would have died in a prison cell, which is exactly why he committed suicide. And then they moved on.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. I've had Alan Dershowitz on the show several times. He's obviously very passionate about defending Israel. Okay. Speaking of, let me follow up with this. Do you think this narrative right now is we've got tens of thousands of videos we've got to comb through? Some of them are children. Kash Patel was very gung-ho about this. Pam Bondi, very gung-ho. Are we going to get all of the truth, or at least a large portion of the truth, or is this a cover-up that's going on? What do you think?
You know, if there were, listen, I'm saying this as a 100% political independent. If the Democrats were in office right now, we wouldn't even have this discussion, because there would be no release of documents. There would be no release of information. Zero. I only trust Donald Trump and Donald Trump's appointees to release this information. I wouldn't trust any other Republican. It's because Donald Trump is an outsider. Donald Trump does not have a vested interest in covering up for anybody. And I really believe that he wants this information to be out there. And think of this, to consider this. The actual black books that we've heard so much about sold at Sotheby's recently. Right? They're in private hands now. They're out there. The information's out there. All we want is the background to that information. I want to know who took advantage of minors. I want people who committed these heinous crimes to be brought to justice. I think, I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb here. I think Kash Patel is trying to protect the rights of the innocent, or protect the rights of those people who can't be charged with a crime for one reason or another. So I think he's being deliberate. I don't think he's trying to pull a fast one. Now, Pam Bondi did exactly the right thing by calling for the release of everything, and she wants it, yesterday. But at the same time, she's not the one who's overseeing the files, the going through of the files page by page by page, or frame by frame. So her heart's in the right place, but I think we need to give Kash Patel the benefit of the doubt and let his people get through this mountain of evidence before we start pointing fingers. I'll be the first one to point the finger if it doesn't happen, but I'm willing to cut him a break.
I had him on my show 4 or 5 times before the election. I genuinely believe him when he says he wants to release this, but I do believe he wants to release it the correct way, because you can release something the wrong way. Like look at the P. Diddy thing, right? Like
Exactly
suddenly
right.
people are going missing. People are changing their testimony. Like big names, big money, big threats. Like there's a lot that's going on. It's interesting, John, that you mentioned trusting Trump, that he can't be bought. He did a press conference recently with RFK Jr., and he said, listen, I know this is going to get me in trouble, but governors are bought off by big pharma, senators, members of Congress, mayors. They're the biggest lobby in Washington, D.C., which is why I have to break them. And he's like,
Yeah.
I'm going after them. And they gave him millions of dollars. He got elected, and now he's saying, I don't care. I have to do the right thing. When he said that, I was like, yes, this is what I voted for. I want someone that will break up these big lobbies and these people that have a hold over our life. Did you see that? The US dollar is under siege, and Biden's policies have caused irreparable damage, slashing its buying power by up to 30%. Inflation is down, but everything is still expensive. Meanwhile, President Trump is fighting to restore America's economic strength and protect the petrodollar. History tells us the dollar's value has plummeted while gold and silver have soared. If you're betting on the future, 10 or 20 years from now, gold and silver are the clear winner. Don't let your wealth be eroded. Colonial Metals Group's experts can help guide you. Whether you're starting fresh or managing an existing IRA or your family's fortune. Now, their professionalism can help you understand why gold and silver are so powerful. I want you to act now by giving them a call at 800-807-2143 for a special offer. Get a free safe and up to $7,500 in free silver. But best of all, I want you to get peace of mind. Go to colonialmetalsgroup.com/Stephen-Gardner or snap the QR code in the bottom left-hand corner. You guys, I believe in gold and silver. You should have some in your portfolio.
Oh my God, yes. And let me tell you something about my own experience. From 2009 to 2011, I was the senior investigator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And this was a job that should have been the job of a lifetime. And it wasn't, because I wasn't allowed to investigate anything. John Kerry was the chairman at the time, and John Kerry so desperately wanted to be Secretary of State that I was not allowed to produce any finished product, any finished study that cast shadow over the Obama administration. So with that said, Kerry came into the office one day and he said, I want us to write a bill on carbon trades. What do you call it? Carbon credits. Carbon credits. Yeah, he was the number 2 on the finance committee. He was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. This is not a Foreign Relations Committee issue, but he doesn't call the shots on finance, or didn't. So he said, we got to write this carbon credits bill. I was like, okay. So the next day I go into the office and there's some guy sitting at my desk. I said, who the hell are you? He said, I'm the lobbyist. I said, for what? He said, the carbon credits bill. I said, we're writing the carbon credits bill. He said, no, you're not. I am. And he did. He was there for months and he wrote the carbon credits bill. I never learned his name, but he was one of the lobbyists. He was one of the pressure people. He was one of the Washington insiders. He had a little staff of minions around him that were using up all the other desks. And I said to my boss, I've been in Washington for 40 years and I've never actually seen it play out like this. But this is life in Washington.
Wow. I mean, I saw stuff like that in Netflix House of Cards.
Yeah, right, exactly.
You saw it with your own eyes.
Yeah, the guy took my desk.
Wow. I made a joke in my broadcast last night. Trump's big, beautiful bill took so long because the lobbyists were writing it, not members of Congress.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
We're lucky if the members of Congress actually read the bill once it's finished. And you know what? And they don't. They don't, because they know that the bill is then going to go to conference committee to be reconciled. And they would have to read it all again anyway.
Such a broken system. Okay,
Oh my God.
tell my audience, John. You ended up serving time in
Yes.
prison for doing the right thing. Tell me that story.
Yeah, Stephen, it's an ugly story to tell you the truth. I was a senior CIA officer in the CIA's Counterterrorism Center. I was the chief of operations in Pakistan after 9/11. And in that position, I led a series of raids in March of 2002 that resulted in the capture of Abu Zubaydah, who we believed at the time was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda, as well as many dozens, I'm not allowed to say the number still, but many dozens of other Al-Qaeda fighters. Abu Zubaydah was the first high-value target that we had captured in the war on terror. We had killed Mohammed Atef. He was Al-Qaeda's head of military operations, it was called. But Abu Zubaydah was the first capture. And at headquarters, they were convinced that Abu Zubaydah had information on impending attacks. Bin Laden had said that they were planning another attack that would dwarf 9/11. And so we were genuinely worried that, such an attack was on its way. So I got back to headquarters in May of 2002, and I was asked by a senior officer if I wanted to be, his words, trained in the use of enhanced interrogation techniques. He explained it to me. I said, that is a torture program, and torture is illegal. No, it's not, he said. The president approved it, and the Justice Department said we could do it. I said, I have an ethical problem with this, and I think it's illegal. I'm not going to do it. I was the only one of 14 people who refused the training. Now, I got promoted on the strength of the Abu Zubaydah capture. So I became the executive assistant to the CIA's deputy director. And in that position, I saw literally everything in the world that the CIA was doing. And so the cables began coming back from the secret site, documenting the torture of Abu Zubaydah. And at the same time, people who were there on site are writing cables saying, whoa, this is not what I signed up for. I quit, or I want to come back home, or I'm a doctor and I took a Hippocratic oath to do no harm, and you want me to revive him just so he could be tortured more. I'm not doing that. So I was like, okay, I'm not the only person who thinks this is nuts. But I kept silent, thinking somebody would say something. Nobody did. And finally, in December of 2007, I said something in a nationally televised interview on ABC News. I said that the CIA was torturing its prisoners. I said that torture was official U.S. government policy. And I said that the policy had been personally approved by the president. As you might imagine, the CIA then filed what's called a crimes report against me with the Justice Department, saying that I had revealed top secret information. So the FBI investigated me from December of 2007 to December of 2008. And they determined in 2008 that I had not committed a crime. They closed the case and they sent my attorneys something called a declination letter, declining to prosecute me. My wife and I went out to dinner that night to celebrate. 3 weeks later, the heavens open and Saint Barack Obama comes down to earth to become president. And he names John Brennan, an old nemesis of mine, to be the Deputy National Security Advisor for counterterrorism. John and I always disliked each other. I thought he was in over his head intellectually, to tell you the honest to God's truth. I had no idea that John Brennan asked the Justice Department to secretly reopen the case against me. And so for the next 3 years, my phones were tapped, my emails were intercepted, and teams of FBI agents followed me everywhere. You should have seen some of these 302 reports. Subject and his family went to church. They remained in church for an hour and 15 minutes. They then drove home. It's like, seriously? They spent $6 million over the course of 3.5 years following me. Finally, in January of 2012, the Obama administration charged me with 5 felonies, including 3 counts of espionage. for speaking with ABC News. Now, of course, I hadn't committed espionage, which is a potential death penalty charge, I might add.
Yeah.
I hadn't committed espionage. And what they did was something that they did, not just to me, but as a matter of policy. They waited until I went bankrupt because of legal bills, and then they dropped the espionage charges. So in the end, I took a plea to a lesser charge. I had actually declined their offer. And I said, no, I want to go to trial. And my lawyers came to my house 7 o'clock in the morning. It was make or break day. And one of them said very pointedly, he said, you know what your problem is? Your problem is you think this is about justice. And it's not about justice. It's about mitigating damage. Take the deal. And then one of the others said, this could be a blip in your life, or it could be the defining event of your life. Make it the blip. And so I took the deal. You know, there's this old joke too that half the people in prisons are innocent. Well, you know what? Newsflash, they are. But they took a deal because the alternative was rolling the dice when you know that according to ProPublica, the federal government wins 98.2% of its cases. Who wants to take those chances?
I know a lot of people involved in January 6th that I've interviewed. They said the same thing.
There it is.
The pressure was so great. We were on the verge of bankruptcy. I just finally rolled over and let the government, crush me. So
they know that eventually you just aren't going to be able to take it anymore. You know, when Aaron Schwartz committed suicide, he committed suicide right after being charged with multiple felonies related to cutting and pasting an internet link. And the Obama people came down on him. He killed himself. And a reporter for CNN called me and said, are you surprised that Aaron Schwartz committed suicide? And I said, no, I'm surprised that more people don't commit suicide. Because the Justice Department, especially under Democrats, it's this system of lawfare that they use. What they like to do, there are two things. One is venue shopping. So they will seek to charge you in the federal district where they are most likely to get a conviction and you are most likely to get the severest sentence. And the other thing is called charge stacking, where they'll charge you with 10, 20 felonies. They'll wait until you go bankrupt, and then they'll come back and say, okay, take a guilty plea to one, and we'll dismiss all the other charges. What are you going to do? I said to my lawyers that day, I said, if I turn down this deal for 23 months and I go to trial and I'm convicted, what am I realistically looking at? And they said, realistically, 12 to 18 years. I had 5 kids at home. So I made it the blip.
Wow. Whew.
Yeah.
How, I hope this isn't too personal. How did you survive prison? I can't.
You know, it's funny. I wrote a book called Doing Time Like a Spy, How the CIA Taught Me to Survive and Thrive in Prison, which much to my shock won 2 literary awards. But I decided, well, you see, this is another Obama thing. At my sentencing, my attorneys asked the judge to send me to a minimum security work camp. Okay, no bars on the windows. They don't lock the door. You work in town. You're free to come and go as you please. You're just on your honor not to abscond. And the Justice Department said, yeah, we don't have any objection. So she sentenced me to a minimum security work camp. Well, I got to prison, and they said, not according to our paperwork, you're not in any minimum security. And they put me in the actual prison. So it took me 5 days before I got access to a phone. I called my lawyers. I said, hey, they put me in the actual prison with the pedophiles and the mafia dons and the drug kingpins. What do I do? And my lead attorney said, oh my God. He said, well, we could file a motion, but it'll be 2 years before we get a hearing and you'll be home by then. I'm sorry, buddy, you're going to have to tough it out.
Oh my gosh.
And so I told myself, you're trained for this. You've been in far worse places than this. You can do it. And so I decided to rely on my CIA training to make sure that I stayed safe, and remained at the top of the social heap. And the most important thing I did in that respect was to make strategic alliances. And I'll tell you, the Italians adopted me right after I got there. And I mean Italians named Gambino, Lucchesi, Bonanno. You get the idea. I'm still in touch with them. I talked to one of them yesterday. He called me yesterday to say hello. You know, to a lesser extent, I made sure that I was good with the Aryans. And then at one point, one of my cellmates, who was a member of the Norteños, the Mexican drug cartel, he asked me if I was educated, and I said yes. And he said, "Would you write my appeal?" I said, "Well, I'm not a lawyer." He said, "Yeah, but you're educated." And I said, "Yeah, you know what? You're right. How hard could it be to write an appeal?" I said, "Let me see your paperwork and I'll come up with something." So I wrote an appeal. He was guilty. The appeal was denied, but I didn't charge him anything. And so he told all the other Mexicans that I was an honest person. And so I didn't have any problem with the Mexicans. But to tell you the truth, as soon as word got around that I was with the Italians, I didn't have 5 seconds of trouble. Nothing.
Wow. Ooh, gosh, I can't imagine.
You sleep with one eye open. I'll say that.
Yeah, I bet there's a reason that is a popular saying. Let me ask you this, just because you have that background with Pakistan. You know, on my news show, I cover Pakistan and India. They're trading missile attacks and gunfire and all that. And then suddenly that just fizzles away and Trump says, "Yeah, we handled it." What do you think happened there? Because you had nuclear countries ramping up very, very quickly.
I have several different thoughts about this. First of all, I believe Donald Trump. Not because he's Donald Trump, but because in 2002, I'll tell you another little story. 2002, I was with a young first tour case officer. She had never served overseas before. We went down to the embassy cafeteria for lunch. The cafeteria was gigantic because the embassy was gigantic. The cafeteria held easily 150, 200 people. We were the only people in the cafeteria that day at 12 o'clock noon. And she looks around and she says, "Where is everybody?" And I said, "They've been evacuated." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because Pakistan's on the brink of nuclear war with India. Don't you read the papers?" And she said, "No, I've been so busy on Al Qaeda. I haven't paid any attention to what's going on." I said, "Did you notice the helicopter in the parking lot?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "It's here to rescue us." And she's like, "Oh my God, I gotta spend some time reading the news." Well, this thing is cyclical and it happens. The Indians and the Pakistanis hate each other more than probably any other people on earth, except maybe the Israelis and the Iranians. And they're always on the brink of something terrible spinning out of control. Number one. Number two, there was a report last week that Pakistan had shot down 5 Indian jets. That is remarkable. It's dramatic. And I didn't believe it. Then there was a report saying that the Pakistani jets were not being flown by Pakistanis. They were being flown by Chinese. Now, the Chinese and the Pakistanis are joined at the hip. They love each other. They trust each other. There are Chinese all over Pakistan and Pakistanis all over China. I think that's possible. I also believe that Donald Trump sent somebody, we don't know who, could have been the CIA director or deputy director. In 2002, the incident that I told you about a second ago, it was the deputy secretary of state, flew right out and said, "Both of you guys, cut it out right now. Nobody's going to launch nuclear missiles on anybody." And they both backed off. I really believe that's what happened. I believe that the Indians heard that there were Chinese piloting Pakistani planes. The Indians don't want to take on the Chinese. They'll lose. And the Trump administration told them both back off. And they just decided that the unknown was scarier than the known. And they were just going to let this thing drop.
Okay. Interesting. That was when I saw that you were the head of counterterrorism in Pakistan. I was like, perfect. I've been wanting to understand that story, so thank you for helping me understand that.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, here's another one. The media goes back and forth about Trump and Israel and anti-Semitism and Netanyahu and Iran, and it's like every day there's something. But I feel like Trump has beef with Netanyahu, but not with Israel and not with the Jews. And he's trying to strengthen them by building a better coalition and relationship with the wealthy Arab nations. He goes over to the Middle East. He has this super successful interaction with several major countries. They're flying jets like they did such a big to-do about him coming.
Oh, yeah.
In, but he doesn't.
Unprecedented.
Yeah, it was a beautiful. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like watching a king be treated really well. But then he doesn't make a stop in Israel. What do you think is going on with President Trump, Israel, Iran, these Middle East countries?
That's a very important observation. He did not stop in Israel, and any other president, or even this president in a different circumstance, would have stopped in Israel. That was a message to Benjamin Netanyahu. This is a very complicated issue. First, let me say that my first 3 tours in the CIA were in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain. So I know the region very, very well. Spent the happiest years of my life there. The Gulf Arabs really do want a relationship with Israel. They really do. They've never liked or trusted the Palestinians. And especially because the Palestinians sided with Iraq during the first Gulf War, there's no love of the Palestinians in the Gulf. When they see video footage of civilians, women, children, the elderly just being massacred in Gaza, tens of thousands of people, maybe more. The British medical journal, The Lancet, is estimating 100 to 180,000 people have already died because we don't know how many are under the rubble. That's unacceptable. That meets the legal definition of a genocide. You can't kill civilians just wantonly like that. I mean, we get it that Israel needs to be secure, but there are rules, there are international laws. You just can't do that. Also, keep in mind that although Benjamin Netanyahu is the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history, the Israeli political system is such that he has never won more than 27%. Never. He's wildly unpopular in Israel. Wildly. He's far more popular in the United States. He was born and raised in Philadelphia. I mean, he speaks like an American. But he's far more popular here. Now, the one thing that Netanyahu has been very, very good at over the years is equating anything that is anti-Netanyahu with anti-Semitism. Any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, and it's not. There's quite a large organization in New York and here in Washington called Jewish Voices for Peace. It's mostly leftist, but they're all Jews and they're all anti-Netanyahu. Half of them have served in the IDF. You know, they've lived in Israel. Their parents live in Israel. A close friend of mine who lives here in Washington, his parents and sister still live in Israel. He's the only one that's in the United States. But he's like, we can't just have as our solution to just kill everybody. That's not a solution, to kill everybody. And another thing too about relocation, this plan that Netanyahu has to relocate Gaza Palestinians either to the border with Egypt, which the Egyptians have rejected 3 times already, or to force them into Jordan. The forcible relocation of a people is also a definition of genocide. You can't do that. You can't just throw people out of a land that they've been in for 2,000 years because you don't like their politics or because it's inconvenient for your development policies. Another problem that the Palestinians have is that other countries simply don't want them. Fully 50% of the population of Jordan is Palestinian. And we know that because if you are a Jordanian born in Jordan, you have a green passport. if you are a Palestinian, a descendant of a Palestinian refugee from 1948, you have a black passport. And another reason why the Jordanians don't trust the Palestinians is that in 1968, Black September, the Palestinian terrorist group, was literally fighting on the palace steps to assassinate King Hussein and to take over Jordan for themselves and to call it Palestine. Wow. So the Egyptians say, look, we have enough people already. We don't want any Palestinians. The Jordanians say, we have more than enough Palestinians. The Gulf Arabs don't like the Palestinians. They prefer Pakistanis, Indians, Filipinos, Bangladeshis, even Syrians. The Palestinians just have nowhere else to go. The Israelis are going to have to come to some sort of an agreement. You know, when I was serving in Saudi Arabia in 1991, the Saudis came to us. Who was the Secretary of State at the time? It was like Larry Eagleburger or somebody. It was George H.W. Bush was the president. Oh, no. It was James Baker. It was right before Baker left. And the Saudis came to us and said, we would be willing to initiate talks with the Israelis. This is huge, right? 1991. We would be willing to initiate talks with the Israelis if they allow us to build a port, an airport, and an electrical grid for Gaza. And the Israelis said, absolutely not. Not ever. And it just died. It just didn't go any farther than that.
Okay. Yeah, I know it's complex and it's a story I hate covering on my channel, but when Trump went over there, I was like, oh, this is really, really interesting.
And the fact that he didn't go to Israel was a message that Netanyahu needs to get with the program. And this is not going to be a one-sided negotiation. You know, the Saudis reportedly were within a week of recognizing Israel with Jerusalem as its capital. It was October 7th that screwed all that up. And now they're not willing to do that because things have gotten so ugly and so deadly that there's got to be some sort of a solution. You know, even before October 7th in Gaza, I don't know if you've ever been to Gaza. I went in 2022 because I wanted to see it for myself. They had 2 hours a day of clean water and 5 hours a day of electricity. Not because there's no clean water and no electricity, but because the Israelis shut it off just to screw them. Well, you know, you can only do that for so long before people finally have had enough and they lash out. And that's what we saw. You know, October 7th was terrible. It was a terrorist attack. Truly. Israeli civilians were killed. This was not a military to military attack. But the Israeli response has been just a hideous violation of international law. There are no Palestinian tanks or armored personnel carriers, or there's no Palestinian Air Force or anything. This is mostly civilians. And another beef that I have, and I've written about this extensively, is the Israelis have virtually wiped out Palestinian Christians. You know, there aren't many to begin with. It's about 2%. Used to be 10%. And the Israelis are just wantonly bombing churches, bombing Christian centers, bombing Christian hospitals. They're just killing everybody.
Yeah. Oof. It'll be interesting to see how Trump handles this, because with Biden, I felt like he didn't know where to go, because he didn't want to lose the Muslim vote, and he didn't want to lose the Jewish money in order to capture the White House. That's right. And then he ended up losing them both.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly what happened. Yes.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. You know, I've recently just started thinking about 9/11 a lot again. You were in the CIA at the time that happened, and I think I read online you were at CIA headquarters when the news came in. What were things like with top government leadership? I mean, I was in the Dominican Republic on a Christian mission when it happened. So I missed out on a lot of that. But what was it like at CIA headquarters and in the country at that time?
Oh man. That morning, I had a meeting scheduled along with the director of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center. We were going to see Condoleezza Rice on an issue that is just so silly now after 25 years that you would just shake your head. So I got a call that our car was ready, and I walked over to Kofor Black's office, and his secretary. This was back in the day when you couldn't watch TV on your computer. So she had a little TV on her desk, and one of the towers of the World Trade Center was burning. And I said, "What happened to the World Trade Center?" And she said, "A plane flew into it."
This is Condoleezza Rice?
No. This is Kofor Black's secretary before we drove to the White House to see Condi Rice. So I said, because I'm an idiot, I said, that happened once before, 1932. A plane flew into the Empire State Building, but it was really foggy and rainy. And like, it's so crystal clear today. How can you not see that you're flying into the World Trade Center? And as soon as the words came out of my mouth, the second plane flew in. And neither one of us reacted. And then finally she turned to me and she said, "Did you see that, or did I imagine it?" And I ran back to my office. I said, "Guys, 2 planes just hit both towers of the World Trade Center. I think we're under attack." I will interrupt myself here and tell you that 2 months earlier, on July the 6th, totally normal day, I was entertaining a group of Middle Eastern intelligence officers. This is something we did every single day at the CIA. You bring them in, you do a day of briefings, you exchange gifts, you take them up to get a photo with the director, and then you take them out to a fancy dinner at night. And then the next day you do it with another country's intelligence service, day after day after day. So on July 6th, 2001, I had scheduled this day of briefings, and it was 6 guys at the major and lieutenant colonel level. So I asked the junior most analyst on Al-Qaeda to come in and just give an overview of Al-Qaeda. But instead of this junior analyst coming in, Kofor Black himself came in with the chief of operations for Alex Station, the Osama bin Laden group. And I jumped up and I said, gentlemen, I said, this is Ambassador Kofor Black. He's the director of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center. And this is the chief of operations for the Osama bin Laden unit. Kofor sat down and he said, and this is how he started. He said, "Something terrible is going to happen. We don't know exactly what or where, but it's going to be an attack on a scale that we've never seen." He said, "We're hearing Al-Qaeda camp commanders on the phone with their students, and they're crying and saying, 'I'll see you in paradise.' We're hearing code words for a massive attack. The honey salesman is coming with vast quantities of honey. There's going to be a massive wedding. There's going to be a great football match, all code for an attack." He said, "I'm begging you, if you have any sources inside Al-Qaeda, please help us." And they just sat there and looked at him. So at the end of the day, I sent them back to their hotel, told them I'll pick them up in a couple of hours to go to dinner. But I went back to Kofor's office to thank him. And I said, "Kofor, I got to ask you, was that just for their benefit, or were you serious?" And he said, "Oh, no, I'm deadly serious. Something terrible is going to happen." And then September 11th, my first thought was, this is what he was talking about. This is what he was warning us about. So the second plane hits, and then the third plane goes into the Pentagon. There were about 300 people in the office. We all packed up to the front where Kofor's office was. You have to picture an enormous room, like a hotel ballroom, with private offices all around the perimeter, and then cubicles, hundreds of us in cubicles, in the center. And there were TVs hanging down from the ceiling. So you had CNN and Fox and MSNBC and BBC and RT and Canal Plus and from all over the world. We're all watching this as it's unfolding. Silence. And finally, somebody behind me shouts, "Will somebody please lead?" And it was like somebody had shaken Kofor. And he said, "Yeah, you, go to the director's office and tell him this. You go to security. You go to operations. Finally, a CIA cop comes in. The CIA has its own police force. He came in and said, everybody evacuate. Nobody budged. So we're standing there watching this, and then Kofor pulls out a chair and stands on the chair, and he says, I'll never forget this. He said, today we're at war, and all of us are going to have to fight, and not all of us are going to come home. If this is not for you, no one will think less of you if you walk out the door right now. Nobody budged. Everybody volunteered to go to Afghanistan because we all knew what this was. We had been waiting for it. And then finally, the cop came back in and said, if you don't evacuate, you'll be arrested. So we evacuate. It took me 2 hours just to get out of the parking lot. I got about halfway to my apartment. I lived about 6 miles from CIA headquarters, and I had to abandon my car on the George Washington Parkway. My girlfriend was several floors above me. She later became my wife. So I called her. I said, we're evacuating. She said, yeah, I'm leaving right now. I said, meet me at my place. So I abandoned my car. I walked the last 3 miles. I saw the Deputy National Security Advisor coming across the Teddy Roosevelt Bridge with no shoes. This is how the level of chaos in Washington that day. He had no shoes. And I remember saying, oh my God, if the White House is evacuating, who's leading us? So we went to my apartment, we went to the roof, and we watched the Pentagon burn for a while. And finally I said, this is ridiculous. We got to go back to work. And we walked back to my car. I drove across the grassy median, went back to CIA headquarters, and I didn't leave for the next 4 days. Just balled up my jacket and slept under the desk and slept 2 hours at a time. Everybody did that. And then got to, the theater as quickly as I could.
Wow. Totally caught off guard. They knew
Chaos.
something big was happening.
But then, what, Stephen, they didn't think it was going to be here. The conventional wisdom was they're going to take out another embassy, right? They'll probably do it in the middle of the workday. Yeah, a big embassy, Paris, London, Manila, something big. We didn't think they're going to attack us right here in the country. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's interesting. I wanted to get your insight on that. Another question I have kind of related to this is President Trump and Marco Rubio, they're talking about supporting this new leader in Syria, not fully trusting him, but not really having anyone else to work with to avoid ISIS and Al-Qaeda getting big again. What are your thoughts on this? Because there's been a lot of people say, oh, look at Trump now dealing with terrorists. And on the other side, they're like, well, he has to avoid the worst terrorists.
Exactly. Okay, you're right. And we should call a spade here. This guy was an Al-Qaeda leader. He was the number 2 in ISIS. He broke off from ISIS, claiming at the time he wanted to moderate. The CIA supported Al-Qaeda in Syria. The State Department supported the Kurds, and the Defense Department supported an independent rebel group. So we had the most screwed up policy on Syria that was possible. But you're right. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could just choose the people that we wanted to lead each country? But that's just not real life. Compare it to this. We could have cultivated a relationship with Fidel Castro in the 1950s when he was a rebel leader, and we didn't. Fidel Castro was a minor league pitcher for the Washington Senators. He liked the United States. We could have cultivated that relationship, but we decided not to because we had thrown our weight behind Batista, love him or hate him. This time it's different. And I have to say, Donald Trump is playing it right. We don't have any choice, and we're not doing this alone. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, has come out and laid out the red carpet and invited Golani to Paris, and then Keir Starmer invited him to London. So we're not just winging it here. There's been a policy hatched by the allies that we're going to get it right this time. It took us a long time to get rid of the Assads. And so we're gonna do it right this time. And Golani seems to be playing ball so far. So one of the most important lessons I learned in the fight against Al-Qaeda. Let me rephrase that. And this is why I think this policy is going to work in Syria. Every Al-Qaeda fighter at the grunt level, at that 18 and 19-year-old fighter level, told exactly the same story. They were from some isolated village in whatever country they came from. They were illiterate. They had no job skills, no job training, and they wanted to get married. But what man would want his wife to marry a kid who can't read, can't write, and can't work? Nobody wants their daughter to marry a guy like that. So the local imam went to these kids and said, "Why are you here in this village? You should make something of yourself. You should go to Afghanistan and make jihad against the Americans. And if you do, we'll give you $300 a month. And if you're martyred, we'll give your parents a $500 martyrdom bonus." And they said, "Okay, I got nothing else going on." They couldn't find the United States on a map. They had no beef with the United States. It's that they were poor. So I've always said, if we were serious, not just the United States, but the West, were serious about addressing the root causes of terrorism, we would be involved in wide-scale economic development and education. What's the first thing Donald Trump did in Syria? The very first thing, he lifted sanctions. He lifted sanctions, so now Syria can accept investment money. And investment money is going to build infrastructure, including better roads, which make trade easier, especially with Turkey, which is the big 800-pound gorilla on the block. An upgrade of and the port of Latakia, right? So ships can come in and make trade easier. It's building the economy. Mark my words, in 20 years, there will be no such thing as a Syrian terrorist, because that economy is going to be on track. So it may not look pretty right now, but this was the right thing to do.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of figured that it may not be it's like in Batman. It's not the hero you want, but the one that you need right now. Like, we're not saying the guy's a great guy, but like, it's what we have to work with right now if we want the area to be better. This has been a great discussion. I definitely want to have you on. I've got several more questions that I could go on and on and on about. But John, if people want to follow you online, continue to hear your thoughts and perspectives, where can I point them?
Thank you. Everything I write and do, I put on Substack. So it's johnkiriakou.substack.com. I'm on X, John Kiriakou. I'm on Facebook, and I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram. I've got a TV show on an online platform called CIA Declassified, where we take declassified documents and tell historical stories based on the documents. That's at Unified Television, UNIFYD. But everything ends up on Substack.
Okay, I'll put that there. Final question. Were you always for Donald Trump, or did something change? Because for now, from my perspective right now, it seems like you're thinking he's the best option for the country right now.
Yes. I was actually a supporter of Gary Johnson's when Donald Trump first ran. Ronald Reagan was right when he said that government is the problem. It's not the solution to the problem. And Gary Johnson, the former Republican governor of New Mexico, was the Libertarian Party's nominee for president twice. So I campaigned in 12 states with Gary. I introduced him at all of his campaign stops. I knew that he wasn't going to win. He did really great by libertarian standards. He got 3.5%.
Yeah.
But it took me a while before I moved over to Donald Trump. But I'm going to add, though, that this is not the Donald Trump of the first term.
Yes.
This is a completely and totally different Donald Trump. This is a Donald Trump who's far more worldly and who has a deeper understanding of international events and much, much more willingness to stand up to the Israelis. I have to say, I am very pleasantly surprised by the way things have been going since January the 20th.
Okay. Interesting. I was picking up on that and thought I would ask. Well, I'm going to put those direct links down below, John, so that people can find your book, your Substack, and your X. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much. Same to you. Take care.